Hello and welcome back to Wide Angle. Nandan Unnikrishnan, our expert in that area, he really is because he's been to all these regions, he was talking about the exact location, the place where the missile could have been fired at this place. Now, point is this, Nandan and John, the plane is coming like this, it is hit. Now, it doesn't come down here. My elementary shikar will tell you that if you hit the bird here, it'll come down there. So, in the case of a 32,000 feet plane, which is up there, if you've been hit here, it will take 10, 20, 30, 100 kilometers before it drops. So, where it has fallen is not necessarily where it was hit. Am I making geometrical and other kinds of sense to you?
No, absolutely. You are right that it would not drop dead, as it were, like a piece of lead in water. But the fact is that the rebels hold quite a substantial territory. So it could have been fired upon and crashed within territory that is held by the separatists. But that does not necessarily mean that the missile was fired from the territory held by the separatists. That is point number one. Point number two is there are disputes as to whether the separatists actually possess this missile. But let's assume for a moment that it is true that either they captured one from the Ukrainians or that the Russians supplied them a battery. This missile, the book, the SA-11 as they call it, is quite capable of being fired independent of any other radar support. And that is where the catch lies, because if it was fired by the rebels, it's quite possible they made an error because they do not have the skills necessary to distinguish between the radar signature of a civilian aircraft and a military aircraft carrying troops, although a trained military crew could have made that distinction. However, I will add one more caveat to that. In 2001, the Ukrainians shot down a Russian Tu-54 flying from Tel Aviv to Russia with all 78 people killed over the Black Sea, and it was the Ukrainian military that shot it down. So we don't know what happened.
John, you seem to divine all these impossible situations.
No, as you know, I was reading from American media today. So some of them commented the American satellites are so active over the region, monitoring every move of the Russians, of the rebels, and this incident took place during daytime, during sunlight hours. And they would have easily captured all the imagery, all what was going on. Why are they not producing any evidence which conclusively shows that it was the rebels who shot the missile? And this missile, has got a very powerful warhead, so the plane would have exploded immediately if it was a missile.
I mean, is it not based on this particular kind of intelligence or similar intelligence that John Kerry was so he was thumping the table and saying, look, we now have proof they've done it?
Yeah, but this is very interesting. The previous day, John Kerry and Lavrov come to an agreement to have an impartial inquiry. They call upon all parties to cease hostilities in Ukraine and then provide this impartial inquiry with all the evidence that is available on the ground, whether it's held by the rebels or the Ukrainian government. After having arrived at this agreement, which is then announced, for Kerry to go and start saying that, we have further evidence that proves that these Russians are behind it. I mean, it belies any kind of understanding.
But Kerry had to deny that he had clinching evidence.
Yes.
When he was asked in a point
Kerry is in trouble on another count. I mean, apparently he was overheard saying, which no American Secretary of State is allowed to say, that anything that is happening in Gaza at the moment is planned, and he said this is pinpointed when that particular neighborhood was hit. And now that the entire lobby in America must be up in blazes. How the hell does the secretary? So he must be on the defensive very much. One of the effects of this particular incident is and I'm not getting into conspiracy theories, is that the world's attention has been diverted totally from the assault, aerial bombardment of Gaza, invasion of Gaza, people packed in there like sardines, and no visual images, very few visual images coming out. On the one hand, it's immediately interspersed with the plane, or you've got Wolf Blitzer sitting there on this, or chat shows discussing it.
And Russia and China have not even bothered to move a resolution in the UN Security Council on Gaza. Can you imagine? While on Syria, the US, France, and the United Kingdom moved umpteen resolutions condemning the Syrian government. But the entire focus is on what happened in Ukraine. I mean, my take on Ukraine is I think the Americans want to convert this incident into the 9/11 for Russia. You know, they want to push Ukraine into NATO, and this is the they think this is the
this
moment
interests me, John. People talk about the West and Ukraine. How much oil does the West get from Ukraine?
Gets none.
Gas?
None from Ukraine. But I mean, there is some Russian gas supplied through Ukraine.
Not some, or what? Where else do they get their power supply from?
No, there is a substantial amount that moves directly, not via Ukraine, but through other pipelines.
Yes.
But the main pipeline is via Ukraine. And there is a substantial amount of gas that is received, gas and oil that is received in Europe via Ukraine. But you know, the problem is not there. The problem is that as Vivek was pointing out earlier, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the West has been trying to encroach and get closer and closer to the Russian border. And it is these sort of no man's lands or borderlands which are under dispute and question.
It's funny that before 2008 there was a reset. And if there's a little bit of a sense of a decline on the Western Hemisphere, it sets in after 2008, after Lehman Brothers and so on and so forth. And it is then that the reset is cancelled and now greater aggression. I have a feeling that we should keep that in focus. Now, before you disappear, gentlemen, let us see what Alexander Kadakin, the ambassador, I spoke to him, I asked him, Ambassador, why is the West ratcheting up tensions in Ukraine? What is the end game? What do they want? This is what he said.
It's clearly putting all blame on Russia, being deaf and blind to the atrocities of the Kiev authorities against their own people. The West is trying to bail them out of the deep political and economic crisis engulfing the country. In their words, for anything that goes wrong, even for bad weather, those ugly Russians are responsible. It reminds me of the Stop the Thief episode or situation. Very, very primitive. There must be some deep soul searching on the part of the West.
I also contacted my friend Jeff Pyatt, who in fact was in the American embassy here, and most of us knew him. You're very genial diplomat he was. Now he has sent me a small clip on his position. So let us see what Kadakin has said and his response.
But ultimately, there's not going to be a military solution to this confrontation. What's going to solve this over the long term is Ukraine becoming a healthy, economically transparent democracy anchored in European institutions. And we're working as hard as we can to help to advance that effort.
Now, so this is Nandan. The point is, what are the differences between Germany and the other two Europe? You see, everything is projected as if there's a great coherent West against Russia. The Germans are not with the French on this. The British and the French and the Germans are not together.
Even American businessmen don't want sanction.
In fact, I want to end at the beginning. What was Ms. Newland using 4-letter words about? Will you please recall that incident?
Well, one is that I think you have to make the distinctions between the United States and Europe. Even within Europe, there are distinctions between what we tend to call old Europe and new Europe.
Yes.
It is the Polands and all who are probably more with...
That is Rumsfeld, not you.
Closer to the US positions than old Europe. And even within the United States, US business is not for ratcheting up the sanctions against Russia, at least not at this point of time, because if you know, ExxonMobil and several others have just signed up some lucrative deals to explore and produce gas and oil in Russia. So there are several issues involved which are commercial
and they
in nature.
must be a little anxious about the fact that the Russians and the Chinese have signed this 400 billion gas deal.
And the French have sold weapons recently to Russia.
So therefore...
yes, this China-Russia deal is one of the biggest economic deals of the century so far.
And yet, I must thank you, gentlemen, things are still being ratcheted up in Ukraine. I must leave you with one thought, that in 1914, the Archduke Ferdinand was shot in Sarajevo, and that incident or accident, it led to the beginning of the First World War. In other words, great wars can happen by accident. Having said that, let me not be alarmist. It is also must be registered that 1914 and 2014, there's a gap of exactly 100 years. They are not similar. Thank you and goodbye.